What's the most inappropriate thing you couldn't stop laughing at? Story 1. At a funeral, someone decided to sing a solo to honor the deceased. And oh boy, they could not find the notes to save their life. They were not crying at all, just belting it out like they were on American Idol. I had to hang my head to not let anyone know I was laughing. My friends and family knew, though. The subject matter was sweet, but man, I wish I had that level of confidence. Story 2. My mom loved elephants, so we put her cremated ashes in an elephant cookie jar. Blue, cartoon-looking. The Catholic ceremony was super formal. Everyone all dressed up and priest in full regalia, even adding a bit of Latin. So at one point, he lifted the urn to perform some ritual, and the juxtaposition of the formal with that cookie jar was just too much. I leaned over and whispered to my sister, "How in God's name he's keeping a straight face is beyond me." My sister and I cracked up. The priest just glared at us. My mom had a great sense of humor, so we made her proud. I miss you, Mom. Story 3. I went to a wake as a teenager. The corpse was propped up in the bed rather than in a coffin. Every time someone went to sympathize with the family, they stood on a floorboard that somehow made the corpse's head bob up and down. I was with my friend, and it was torture holding in the laughter. Story 4. At my nan's cremation, as the coffin went into the furnace, they played the bridal chorus by mistake. Instantly, I lost it, just couldn't hold it in. Luckily, after a couple of seconds, others started laughing too. My nan would have found it hilarious. Rest in peace, Nana. I miss you always. Story 5. I went to buy my new Dalmatian puppy food for the very first time, with her on leash and the guy working their dead pants. I used to own a Dalmatian. He was hit by a hearse on my birthday and died. I don't know if this was the guy's go-to line when someone brought their new puppy in, but judging by his expression in regard to my unmitigated laughter, I'm guessing he was serious. Story 6. Someone fainted in one of our aisles during COVID, and a very audible thump could be heard. After he came to, someone was whispering under their breath, "Let the bodies hit the floor. Let the bodies hit the floor." I was horrified at myself but couldn't help it. Story 7. At my grandmother's funeral, when the priest asked us all for a moment of silence to remember my grandmother, my 5-year-old brother, amidst all the silence and hushed crying, saw the priest lighting candles and started singing at the top of his lungs, "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you." He turned one of the saddest moments of my life into the funniest thing I've ever seen. Story 8. At the funeral of a family friend, where it was more or less well known that the deceased and his widow could not stand each other, and that she always denied him a divorce because, surprise, surprise, she liked his money more than his happiness. That said, she made such a spectacle of herself on the day of wailing, throwing herself on the casket, great heaving sobs with moans of "My dear darling husband, how will I go on without you?" that nearly everyone who knew them intimately were either cringing or trying hard to smother laughter. I had my face pressed into my balled-up jacket and my shoulders were shaking. People thought I was crying. I was, mind you, but only because I was laughing so hard. Story 9. My dad accidentally hit the sunroof open button in the middle of a very slushy/snowy Michigan winter day. He looked up, realized what had happened, then had a slab of slush fall on both his and my mom's head. They were both extremely livid, and I, safely in the back seat, was cackling. He even said, "It's not really funny." And I said, "Not from your angle, no?" and continued cackling. Story 10. It wasn't funny, but I struggled to contain my laughter when I was at a church gathering during prayer. The preacher mentioned a friend whom he had lost. Cause of death: choked on a piece of fried chicken. Story 11. 8 years ago, my now husband made a really good chicken dish for our small group. His sister's then boyfriend had a severe allergic reaction to whatever was in there. So she comes out and asks if there were peanuts in the recipe, and he goes, "No." I double-checked because I knew he was allergic to peanuts. Wait, does peanut butter count? And I lost it. I got the giggles and I couldn't stop laughing. Story 12. I once was in the hospital when a lady came into the emergency room who had nearly overdosed on something. She had lost complete motor function from the neck down. She kept screaming she's paralyzed and her life was over. It was brutal to watch. Then the nurses told her she's fine, and once the drugs wear off, she will regain all motor function, just like last time. Watching this woman regain her motor function one little inch at a time was the funniest thing I had ever seen in my life. Her commentary was hilarious. I was trying so hard not to laugh, but it wasn't possible. Story 13. The Windows error sound played in class, and one of my friends said, "Ah, shoot, who unplugged Stephen Hawking?" This was the same day he passed away. Even the teacher was crying while laughing. Like, seriously, his body wasn't even cold yet. Story 14. I was in a group meeting at work. The new adjunct manager was outlining some procedures he planned to implement regarding expectations and requirements. He was drawing some kind of diagram, and sure enough, he drew something very phallic. All I could see was that he drew a representation resembling male genitalia on the whiteboard. I tried my best to hide my amusement. I had to excuse myself when he noticed my reaction. At this point, I was stifling laughter. I was so mad at myself, considering it unprofessional and all, which just made it worse. Story 15. There was this really sweet 18-year-old girl who worked at a restaurant I worked at. One morning, she decides to park about 5 blocks from the restaurant, which is located in downtown. It's also dark outside because it's very early in the morning. A homeless man asks to get in her car to warm up. She says yes. Then it becomes time for her to start walking to the restaurant, and she tries to kick him out, but he doesn't leave. So she calls our manager, crying, instead of the police. The manager calls the police, and the homeless man is escorted out of her car. This girl parked so far away because my manager had sent out a message the night before saying save the close parking spots for customers. But she meant like right in front of the restaurant, not all the parking within a 5-block radius. She let the guy in out of kindness, but I'm sorry, who does that? Could not stop laughing at this sweet girl's utter lack of street smarts. Story 16. When my father died unexpectedly from falling off a roof, literally, it was of course difficult to talk about, and people who had heard would come to offer sympathies. A few days after my sister went back to work, a coworker of my sister came up and gave her condolences while my sister and another coworker who joined the Dead Dads Club Too Young were standing and talking. She finished up expressing how sorry she was to hear and asked, "Was it natural causes?" The coworker cut her eyes at my sister and answered for her, "Yeah, gravity is natural." My sister had to be excused for laughing for about 15 minutes. The coworker was appalled. When she told me about it, I also couldn't help but lose it laughing myself. Grief is weird, humor is a pressure release. Story 17. I knew a person professionally named Mike Litt. He was in his 80s. One day, someone was trying to get his attention and kept yelling his name down a hallway. I lost it. I don't think his parents knew at the time what they were doing to that man by naming him. Story 18. My father committed suicide using a gun, and a family friend did not come to the funeral. He visited some time later and explained he was so grief-stricken that he just could not attend. However, he did say he felt so guilty, saying, "I could have shot myself. This caused me to fall off the couch laughing." Story 19. In math class, we were supposed to solve a problem that the teacher had put on the board. A student was just looking at it. The teacher asked, "What are you doing?" The student said, "I'm doing it in my head." The teacher exclaimed, "Don't just do it in your head." I laughed for about 20 minutes trying to hide my face. Some people thought I was crying, but really, I was laughing. Story 20. Anytime someone in our family died, my grandma would want to see the body for closure. My cousin was murdered 30 years ago, and his body had decomposed too much to visually identify. She could never accept that he was actually dead. Fast forward to 10 years ago, my uncle was in a car accident, and he was submerged in water for days before his body was recovered. She wanted to see him before the cremation, so I went with her. I was also the person who identified his body, so this kind of became our thing. We would go see dead people together. Well, my grandma passed away last year at home, and her body was, you guessed it, in rough condition. No one in my family wanted to see her, but of course I did. I had to. I walked into the freezer at the funeral home, and her head was leaned back, mouth wide open, and her eyes were staring into my soul. I burst out in laughter because she was all of 100 pounds and looked like something straight out of a horror movie. The funeral home director did not know what to do. I asked her for some time alone. I was able to peacefully say goodbye to my grandma. I braided her hair and held her hand. Before I left, I took a selfie with her and I look at it often and just laugh. No one knows I have this picture, but I cherish it. She had the best personality, and she would be laughing with me if she were here. Story 21. My stepmother's mom passed away. My stepmother had her cremated. At the memorial service, my younger sister and I were sitting in the back row. I said to my sister, "I hear she's lost a lot of weight," to which my sister replied, "I bet if you lift that lid, you wouldn't even recognize her." Our niece, who was 16 at the time, turned around and said, "Y'all need to behave." Story 22. I went to Catholic school. I can't remember what class it was or why we were even watching it, but one of the nuns showed us The Green Mile. The scene where Sam Rockwell urinated on one of the guards made me laugh so hard that I got sent out to the hall. When I was allowed back in, the movie had gotten to the point where the same guard says to Rockwell, "Urinate on me, huh?" and proceeds to shoot him with a fire hose. That made me laugh even harder. I got in a lot of trouble that day, and it was totally worth it. Story 23. During my mother's funeral, the priest had a strong accent as well as a lisp. It was awful, and I was cracking up so much I had to cover my face. People thought I was having a breakdown from grief. Ashes to ashes. My best friend was there, and when we made eye contact, we were both gone. Story 24. A kid in my health class once said, "So when the penis gets hard, isn't that called a boner?" Everyone was laughing so hard. The teacher came up to me and asked, "Are you okay?" She thought I was crying, but it was because I was laughing so hard. Story 25. Dad, a widower, had his new girlfriend over for dinner. She mentioned she has a grown son. My wife and I asked, "Oh, what does he do?" She replied, "Well, he's between jobs and lives at home with me." My wife took a bite of food to stay quiet. She continued, "He was working part-time at a restaurant but lost his job. He's also a live-action role player." My wife choked a bit on her food. Nothing wrong with live-action role players. This is the laughing at inappropriate things. He's sad now because his character died last weekend. My wife outright cackled and did a barely believable job of disguising it as choking. We still laugh about how we weren't supposed to laugh even today. Story 26. My stepfather's funeral. He was an absolute disgrace of a human being, and no one except my spoiled baby sister, who was his only biological child, was sad to see him go. But people turned up because that's what you do. I suspect at least a few were there for the same reason I went, to confirm for myself that he was really and truly gone, and I could finally have some sliver of peace knowing he'd never be able to mess with me again. My grandma even came from her nursing home for the day to attend the funeral. She asked me to push her wheelchair up to the casket so she could pay her respects. Paying her respects consisted of saying quietly enough that only I could hear her, "I told you I'd outlive you, you worthless individual." It took all the strength in my body to push her back to my grandpa and run to the bathroom before I lost it. And I laughed until I was crying so hard I could neither see nor breathe. Loved that woman. She passed a bit less than a year later, and I was just devastated. Story 27. We were sitting in the shuttle on the way to the wedding. My youngest daughter was in front with the groom's great aunt. I was sitting directly behind them. "You're 77?" my youngest asked. She had never met someone that old. "Yes," the sweet woman replied, clearly delighted at this 5-year-old making conversation. "Then you'll turn 78? That's right." My daughter started counting. Then 79, then 80, then 81. She kept going. Around 85, I had a sudden realization of where she was headed with this. "Don't say it," I thought. "Don't say it. Don't say it. Don't say it." My dread grew as the count surpassed 95. But there was nothing I could do but listen to it happen. Then 98, then 99, then 100, and then you'll die. Story 28. Not me, but my sister. She was at her father-in-law's funeral when her mother-in-law, who was already showing signs of dementia, looked around and casually said, "Why is everybody so glum?" My sister lost it and couldn't stop laughing. Story 29. I have probably laughed at worse things, but one comes to mind where I was on Snapchat the other day and opened the stickers tab to search party. A sticker of a calendar marked September 11th showed up as one of the suggestions. I laughed so hard before showing my parents, who were not as amused. Story 30. So my mom and my sister made a deal with each other. My sister would read Gone with the Wind if my mom read the first Harry Potter book. My sister kept her end of the deal. My mom did not. She had literal years to keep her end. When she died and funeral plans were being made, my mom's ex-husband joked that we should bury the book with her so that she had all of eternity to read it. I still laugh when I think of it. Story 31. My daughter served a volleyball at a Christian school game. The ball hit a girl in the face and dropped her like a bag of dirt. Churchgoers let out a gasp. I laughed for an inappropriate amount of time.